Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number BB5004-450-633. This is a Bommer hinge. It's a regular hinge, and the only thing that makes it less common, I guess, would be the thickness of the hinge. This is a heavyweight hinge. Telltale sign is the 4 bearing packets that are installed there. And so much data is buried in the part number that I'd like for us to review the part number now. So let's just jump in. BB stands for ball bearing. That's pretty simple. Bommer has a couple of different bearing types. BB is the most common. LB, lube bearing, is the other, used on 3-knuckle hinges and on spring hinges. When it is a heavyweight hinge, you will have 4 ball bearing packets. The 5004 means a number of things, in no particular order. It means it's steel-based. It means it is full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves here that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. It means that it is heavyweight, that it's 180 thousandths thick and not the standard weight 134 thousandths thick. It means that it is template pattern on the locations of the holes for the screws. And speaking of those, screws are included in a complementary finish. Metal and wood screws. Generally what I find is you'll get all machine screws and half wood screws. I can tell that Bommer has packed all machine and all wood screws. So if you've got a metal door, metal frame, wood door, wood frame, or half metal, half wood, you're certainly covered with screws. Feel free to indicate in the comment field when adding the item to cart what you want in terms of the screws. It may be nice that you say all wood screws, so that the factory knows what you intend, what your requirements are. Because sometimes I see half wood screws and all metal screws. No good if you got a wood door and wood frame. The location of those holes are called template. There is a document below this video called template, which we're going to get to, but the physical locations, how you can reference the actual dimensional relationship of all of these holes, is also called a template pattern, a standard derived a few decades ago. So if you have a door and a frame, if you have a frame prepped for these 4.5-inch hinges to the template pattern, this is exactly what it is. Means it's a square corner, most certainly. You can do radiused corners should that ever be a need. I have sold hinges like this to people with a wood door and wood frame, and while they had to mortise it deeper to accommodate the thickness, they still wanted 5/8 radius. That can be accommodated should you want. This is going to have a button tip. You just think about the button. It's a button tip. You can do decorative tips if you wanted. You can do urn tip, steeple tip, acorn tip. The most common decorative tip, of course, is ball tip. All of that can be accommodated from Bommer. This is a non-rising removable pin. You can remove the pin. That's the removable pin part. The non-rising is that in the pin, there is a knurling that's done on the perimeter of the pin so that when you seat it down, it's not going to creep up over time, or at least that's the intent of it being non-rising. You can drive it out, however, should you need to. Should you want to install that hinge, in some other fashion, you could. They actually don't list urn tips from Bommer, so I don't know that that's actually available. Also buried in the BB5004, I think we've covered all of it. As you change that part number, so too will the hinge itself. Now moving into the part number further, the 450, that means that the hinge is 4.5 by 4.5. That's Bommer's way of saying it's 4.5 inch tall and 4.5 inch wide. What's most important for you to know is that the height is the first dimension. Not so important, I guess, if you've got a 4.5 inch hinge, but it certainly would be important if you were installing a 4.5 by 4 or a 5 by 8 Very important, because your preparation on your door and frame is going to be dependent on knowing how tall the hinge is. Just be mindful that the first dimension when calling a hinge is the height. Okay, measured when the width is measured when the leaf is open. As you change that number, the size of the size of the hinge will change. The 633, that means three things. It means, again, it's steel based. Means that it is satin brass. This is a satin brass finish, which is 633. But the 633 tells us it's satin brass over a steel base. If it was satin brass over solid brass, it would be a 606, would be the part number. And in this hinge, there's a lacquer applied. Okay. As you change the 633 into something else, you'll get a different color. The 5004 does refer to a steel-based hinge, and as a result, you would use a part number to describe the finish as one that infers, that means a steel-based product. Okay. Now, that link to the cut sheet, let's take a look at it. The locations of the screws are there, and by all means, if you're not sure if it's going to work for you, just check the template and make sure that if you're replacing, where everything is located is going to be compatible with what you're doing. You'll see that there are other sizes of hinges there, a 4.5 by 4. You'll see that size on aluminum storefront doors very often. And you'll also occasionally have someone specify it in a residential application when they are doing 4.5 inch tall hinges, but want the amount of the projection of the hardware off the pull side face of the door to simply be less. And you can very commonly shift that vertical axis of pivoting in that 1/4 inch when you go to a 4.5 by 4, because it does indeed look a little nicer when there's less hardware hanging off the door, and it's certainly safer. Projecting hardware can create an unsafe condition, so be mindful of how you can, to great effect, use positively a 4 inch wide hinge and still have 4.5. That template will give you then the wide throws, the 4.5 by 5, by 6, by 7. They list an 8 there as well, but I'm suspicious if they do a 4.5 by 8 wide throw. I think they go to 5 inch tall when it's an 8 inch wide hinge. But the locations of the holes for the screws, measured from the outside leaf and the top or the bottom, it's still the same, depending on, regardless of the width of the hinge. You'll see the catalog number, how that part number changes as the base material changes. So a BB5004, if you wanted to do that in solid brass bronze, it's a 5005 now. If you want to do it in stainless, it's a 5006. That's how the part number changes. If you want to do those wide throw hinges, the 5004 becomes a 5014. You want to do 3 knuckle, you're going to go to an LB style hinge, and then it becomes an 8. You start with an LB. If you wanted this hinge as a 3 knuckle, it's going to be an LB 8004. Some people like 3 knuckle because the hinge is less busy. It might be more aesthetically attractive to have less of all of this happening. Personal preference. I like how 3 knuckle hinges look, that's for sure. But 5 knuckle is 999,000 times out of a million that you'll do 5 knuckle hinges. Security pin options. Now, if this was an out-swinging door, you would want a security option, most likely. The common one is a non-removable pin, where they're going to drill and tap a hole into the barrel for a small set screw. The pin of the hinge has a groove cut in it, so that when you tighten the set screw, it seats into that groove, preventing you from driving the pin out. And take it from me, it's practically impossible to drive that pin out. So you would absolutely want that. Otherwise, it would be very easy to drive the pin out, pull the door off the hinges, and then be able to enter. You can also do a security stud, which would be a big block of metal that would be on one leaf and then a hole in the other leaf, so that when the door closed, even though you drove the pin out, you still can't separate the leaves. You can't tip it out because that block is mated into the preparation in the other leaf. There are times when we sell these hinges and both security options are done. But that security stud is usually a lights out sort of scenario. Okay, there is finally a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. That full product catalog, all manufacturers of hardware will talk to you about how to order. They'll give you the matrix by which the part numbers are derived. Refer to that if you're specifying this material. It's incredibly helpful. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bommer logo. And right above it, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bommer BB5004-450-633, heavyweight ball bearing 4.5 by 4.5 inch satin brass steel based hinge, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.